Welcome back to the deep dive. We take complex research, stacks of it, and break it down into what you really need to know. Today, we're diving into, well, a huge technological race. It's shaping our clean energy future. Lithium versus its often overlooked cousin, sodium. It's a battle for the heart of the rechargeable battery.
It really is a championship fight. And the stakes are enormous. Everything about the energy transition, electric cars, grid storage for solar, for wind, it all hinges on batteries.
And the numbers are just wild. By 2030, demand is projected over 2.6 terawatt hours. That's a lot of batteries.
Staggering. And for years, one technology has ruled the roost. Lithium-ion, LIBs. They powered the whole consumer electronics boom, made decent EVs possible.
But as we push this transition harder, we're hitting lithium-ion's weak spot. It seems its supply chain is, well, pretty shaky.
Shaky is a good word. Fragile, precarious. The research really highlights extreme volatility. We're talking about critical metals.
Yeah.
Lithium, cobalt, nickel. They're often expensive, hard to get, and processed in just a few places.
Geopolitically concentrated, right. That spells risk.
Huge risk. And we saw it play out, didn't we? The whole post-COVID supply chain mess, the war in Ukraine disrupting markets.
Those weren't just little blips on the radar.
They were fundamental shocks.
Yeah.
Our sources show something unprecedented. For the first time in like a decade of falling prices, the average cost of an LiFePO actually went up dramatically.
Wow. So that dependence on these specific concentrated resources, it forces us to look for alternatives. Plan B.
Exactly. We need an insurance policy. And that's where sodium-ion batteries, SIBs, come into the picture.
The appeal seems obvious. Sodium is everywhere. It's cheap. Think table salt. It promises, energy security, maybe less vulnerability to those wild price swings.
That's the promise.
Yeah.
But our mission today is to go deeper than just sodium is abundant. We need to really compare the champ libs, specifically NMC and LFP chemistries, against the main SIB contenders, like the oxide and sodium Prussian blue types. We need to understand the real trade-offs: performance, cost, manufacturing, the whole picture.
Okay, let's start with the basics. Performance. If I'm building an EV and I need the absolute maximum range for the least weight, what's the key metric? And why is lithium king there?
Right, the metric you're looking for is gravimetric energy density, watt-hours per kilogram, WH/kg. And lithium has a fundamental, undeniable lead here. It really comes down to basic chemistry.
Okay, break that down for us.
Lithium is element number 3. It's incredibly light. Its ion is tiny. Combine that with its electrochemical potential. It really wants to give up an electron. You get high voltage. High voltage plus low weight equals the highest possible theoretical energy density.
You mentioned the ion is tiny. Can you explain that a bit more simply? What does a tiny ion do inside the battery?
Okay, think of the electrode, where the ions are stored, like a big parking garage. If your cars, the ions are tiny, you can pack way more of them into the same space, the same volume, compared to bigger cars. Sodium ions, they're about 50% larger than lithium ions, just physically bigger.
Ah, okay. So same weight, lithium just holds more charge because the charge carriers are smaller and lighter. What are the actual numbers? How big is the gap?
It's significant. Typical libs you find today. They range from maybe 100 Wh/kg for older tech, up to around 265 Wh/kg for the really high-performance stuff in premium EVs. SIBs. Even the best oxide types are topping out around 150 Wh/kg right now.
150 versus 265. That's a huge difference, almost half. For a car maker, that means if you want 300 miles of range with sodium, you're carrying nearly double the battery weight compared to using lithium.
Pretty much, yeah. That's the reality. And that's precisely why lithium is still absolutely essential for long-range cars, for electric planes maybe someday. Anywhere, weight is just critical.
And it gets worse when you think about the space it takes up, not just the weight. You called it the volumetric density penalty.
Exactly. It's not just about weight. It's about volume. Watt-hours per liter, WHL. Because SIBs store less energy per kilogram, you need physically more stuff, more active material, more layers inside the battery pack to get the same total energy.
Can you give us a sense of how much bigger, like physically inside the cell?
Yeah, that data's pretty stark. Let's say you want a standard 90-watt E-cell. With LFP, the lithium chemistry, you need maybe 62 internal stacks, like layers. Switch to a good oxide SIB, you suddenly need 93 stacks. And if you go for the sodium PBA chemistry, you're looking at 122 stacks. Nearly double the LFP stack count.
Wow. Double the physical components inside just to hold the same charge? That paints a picture. So the final battery pack ends up much bulkier.
Much bulkier. It really limits SIBs for applications where space is tight. Your top-tier LAB NMC cells can hit, say, 520 WHL, the best naoxide SIBs, maybe 293 WHL. NABE is even lower, around 248 WHL. For an EV designer, that's a major headache. It affects the car's design, the manufacturing line, even the size of the factory floor you need to build to produce the same total energy output.
So clear wins for lithium on weight and volume density. What about just efficiency, getting the power out?
Lithium generally has a slight edge there too. LiBs often reach efficiencies up to 95%. SIBs are typically a bit lower, maybe 80, 90%. Some of that goes back to the cell voltage, which is naturally higher for lithium. Historically, it was that high voltage from lithium cobalt oxide, LCO, that really kicked off the whole LEB commercial success story decades ago.
Okay, so performance-wise, lithium's still the champ. But you mentioned SIBs have some advantages too, addressing some of lithium's weaknesses. Safety, for one.
That's the first big plus for sodium. Generally speaking, SIBs are considered inherently safer. They're less prone to thermal runaway, those catastrophic fires you sometimes hear about with LIBs, especially high-energy ones like NMC. That's a huge deal for stationary storage, where safety rules are really strict.
And some materials used in SIBs help with safety and maybe cost too. Something about water.
Right. This is a potential game changer, especially for some Prussian blue analog, or PBA, chemistries. Certain sodium PBAs aren't bothered by small amounts of water. Now, why does that matter? Because making high-performance LIBs is a really tricky, dry process. You need nasty, expensive, toxic organic solvents like NMP. If SIBs can use water-based, aqueous solvents instead, that makes manufacturing much simpler, safer, and critically cheaper.
That sounds like a pretty fundamental shift in how you'd actually make the batteries.
It could be, yeah. And another thing SIBs do well, cold weather. They hold their charge much better in the freezing cold compared to a lot of LIBs. Some can work down to -40°C. That makes them really attractive for places like Scandinavia or Canada, or for remote energy storage that isn't heated. Okay, so lithium wins on pure performance density. But now we pivot, we talk economics. And this is where the narrative really flips, driven by scarcity versus, well, abundance.
Right. The basic argument. Lithium is scarce, costly, tricky supply chains. Sodium is everywhere, cheap. But does that cheap raw material automatically mean a cheaper final battery right now? Or maybe back before things got crazy?
That's the surprising part. Looking at baseline costs, say from 2019, before the big price shocks, the costs were actually much closer than you might expect, given that density difference. Let's use figures from a standard 1,500 milliwatt-year U.S. plant in U.S. dollars.
Okay, give us those 2019 numbers.
All right. High-energy lithium NMC 111, about $126 per kilowatt hour. The cheaper lithium LFP, around $135 per kilowatt hour. Now, sodium naoxide, $125 per kilowatt hour, and sodium NPBA, a bit higher at $148 per kilowatt hour.
Hold on. The oxide at $125 was almost the same price as high-end NMT, and only a bit more than LFP. But we just established it needs way more material, more stacks. How does that work? Those extra components must have been expensive back then.
Exactly. The raw sodium itself is cheap, but that advantage was largely wiped out by the higher cost of other things needed in the SIB cell. We need to break down why SIBs weren't instantly super cheap.
Okay, let's get into the weeds. Where are these extra costs coming from?
Three main areas usually: the anode, the electrolyte, and the cathode materials. First, the anode. Most SIBs right now use something called hard carbon. It works, but it's complex and expensive to produce. Early estimates put hard carbon costs around $15 per kilogram.
$15 a kilo for the anode material. That sounds like a big chunk of the cost. What needs to happen for SIBs to really undercut lithium on price?
The research is pretty clear on this. To beat LFP, which is the current cost benchmark, that hard carbon price needs to fall significantly, below $5 per kilogram. That means huge economies of scale, better production processes, maybe cheaper raw materials for it. It's a major hurdle, maybe the biggest one for SIB cost leadership.
Okay, anode is one challenge. What about the electrolyte, the liquid inside?
Right, the electrolyte, second cost area. Now, while some SIBs might eventually use water, the high-performance ones still need organic electrolytes, similar to LIVs. But the specific salts and solvents needed for sodium ions currently tend to be more expensive than those for lithium.
How much more expensive?
Well, for a standard Li-NMC cell, the electrolyte cost might be around $4.27 per kilowatt arch. For naoxide SIBs, it's more like $8.21 kilowatt arch, and for NAV-PBA, it jumps to nearly 12 kilowatt hours. It just takes different, currently pricier chemicals to move that bigger sodium ion around efficiently and keep the battery stable over time.
Okay, anode, electrolyte. That leaves the cathode, the other electrode. Any advantage for SIBs there?
Yes, here SIBs often have a key material advantage, especially compared to high-performance LIBs like NMC. Both NAV-PBA and naoxide chemistries can use iron Phe very effectively in their structure. Iron is abundant, it's cheap, and it works well chemically in these sodium systems.
Why can't the high-performance lithium batteries just use cheap iron then?
It's usually about stability, especially at the high voltages needed for high energy density and libs. When you try to use iron in, say, NMC, it tends to cause problems as you charge and discharge. The structure can degrade, the capacity fades quickly. LFP lithium-iron-phosphate is the big exception for lithium. The phosphate part acts like a scaffold. It stabilizes the iron, which is why LFP is cost competitive with SIBs, or at least it was.
Right, was being the keyword, because the whole cost picture got turned upside down in 2022 with that price shock. Explain what happened there.
Yeah, starting 2021, really accelerating in 2022. Global instability, supply chain chaos. The price of key battery metals just went nuts. Lithium carbonate, the raw material for LiFePO cathodes, the price just soared. It exploded. Supply couldn't keep up with demand.
And what did that explosion in lithium prices do to the actual manufacturing cost of an LiFePO cell?
It completely flipped the script. If you rerun the cost calculations using those peak 2022 commodity prices, it's shocking. That line NMC cell that cost 126 kilowatts, it jumped to nearly 186 kilowatt hours. Even LFT, which uses less nickel and cobalt, shot up to 186 kilowatts too because the lithium carbonate itself became so incredibly expensive.
Wow. And sodium, how did SIB costs react to that same market craziness?
That's the SIB superpower, price stability. Because they don't rely on lithium or cobalt or nickel, their cost barely budged. That NaN oxide chemistry, it only went up slightly to about $128.50 kilowatts.
So during that peak volatility, suddenly there was this massive cost gap, like $60 per kilowatt hours cheaper for sodium. That really shows how SIBs can act as a buffer against that kind of market chaos.
It's more than just a buffer, it's a strategic shield. Imagine you're planning a multi-billion-dollar gigafactory. Knowing your core component costs won't suddenly jump 50% because of speculation halfway around the world, that kind of certainty is incredibly valuable. It dramatically lowers your economic risk.
Okay, so stability is a huge economic plus. But you mentioned SIBs have another technical edge performance under pressure, right? High power stuff, rate capability.
Exactly. Rate capability. That's how fast you can charge or discharge the battery. Think high C rates. This matters hugely for things like grid stabilization, injecting power instantly, or for industrial uses and for consumers. Really fast EV charging.
Let's make that real. A 5C rate, that means charging the whole battery in what, 12 minutes? That sounds like extreme stress. How do lithium and sodium handle that?
Fundamentally, SIBs seem to handle high rates better. It's down to the physics of how the ions move. Even though the sodium ion is bigger, the way it interacts with the electrolyte seems to allow for faster transport, faster reactions at high speed. Lithium ions, ironically, can sometimes get bogged down or create bottlenecks at the interfaces when you push them really hard.
Okay, let's see the data. That high 5C rate scenario, what happens to performance?
The differences are dramatic, and they directly impact cost effectiveness when you need power fast. Take line NMC. At 5C, its usable capacity can plummet by almost 50%. It just can't deliver the energy effectively. That pushes its effective cost per usable kilowatt-hour way up, close to 188 kilowatts in that scenario. LFP does better than NMC, but still loses significant capacity at 5C. Its effective cost jumps to maybe 148 kilowatts. Now, the oxide, this is where SIBs shine. It retains something like 99% of its capacity, even at 5C. Its performance is rock solid, which means its effective cost stays right down there, around 127 kilowatts.
That's incredible. So SIBs aren't just cheaper when raw materials spike, they're fundamentally more cost-effective if your main need is bursts of high power, because they don't fade like lithium does under stress.
Precisely. If you're a utility needing instant grid support, constantly cycling batteries hard, SIBs offer much better value because they just handle the power demands without degrading nearly as quickly.
Which leads to this idea of combining them, right? Hybridization. Lithium for range, sodium for power.
That's definitely looking like a key strategy going forward. Big players, like CATL, are already working on hybrid battery packs. It's an elegant solution. You use the SIB cells for the tough stuff, the quick acceleration, the heavy regenerative braking, the ultra-fast charging. They handle the high C rate stress.
Well, the libs just cruise along, holding the bulk charge for range.
Exactly. The LiFePO cells provide the high energy density for long distances, but they're shielded from the extreme power cycles that wear them out faster. It's about optimizing the whole system.
And development is moving fast. You mentioned SIBs are even starting to close that density gap with some LiFePO chemistries.
Yes, absolutely. Companies like CATL are pushing new sodium chemistries. They have one called Naxtra, claiming energy densities up around 175 Wh/kg. Now compare that. Many standard LFP packs today are around 160 Wh/kg. So if SIBs can match or even beat LFP on density while keeping their cost stability and high power advantages, well, That changes the game significantly. And this whole race, it's rapidly moving beyond just chemistry. It's becoming about geography, about national security. There's this global fear, that battery metals could become the new oil, volatile, controlled by a few, a source of conflict.
And that fear comes directly from that supply chain concentration we talked about. Lithium refining, separators, cobalt, mostly happening in just a handful of places. So who's winning the manufacturing race right now? Where's it cheapest to actually build these battery cells?
Well, China is the undisputed giant right now. They control something like 3/4 of global battery manufacturing capacity. Our analysis, looking at a typical 1,500 milliwatt-year plant, shows costs are driven by pretty basic factors: labor rates, energy prices, and, increasingly, government policy.
So where is it cheapest? Globally.
The analysis points to China and, interestingly, Chile as potentially the lowest cost locations. China wins on scale, efficiency, integrated supply chains, low labor, low energy costs. It often has a built-in advantage of nearly 10 kilowatt hours compared to other places. Chile looks good on paper because of low labor costs and trade agreements, but it struggles with things like skilled workforce availability and consistent policy support.
And on the other end, the most expensive places.
India and the United States come out as generally more expensive for cell production. India's challenge is mainly very high industrial electricity costs that alone can add maybe 11 kilowatt hours to the cell cost compared to China. The U.S. has high labor costs, though relatively cheaper electricity helps offset that a bit.
That cost difference, $10, $15 per kilowatt arch, that adds up fast. It means a more expensive EV or higher grid storage costs, which explains why governments are stepping in with huge policy packages, right? Trying to level the playing field or bring manufacturing home.
Absolutely. This is now a major geopolitical battle fought with subsidies and industrial strategy. Look at the United States. The Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, it's massive. Not just the dollar figures, potential subsidies of 10 kilowatt hours for domestic modules, but how it's structured.
What are the key parts of the IRA driving change?
It's heavily focused on domestic sourcing. To get the full tax credits, a growing percentage of the battery's critical minerals have to be sourced or processed in the U.S. or from countries with U.S. free trade agreements. It's explicitly designed to kickstart a U.S. lithium industry. The U.S. actually has large reserves. The ambition is huge. Drive domestic battery costs down towards 60 kilowatt hours by 2030. That would totally redraw the map.
And China. They're already leading, but they're not standing still, especially on SIBs.
No way. China's approach is very top-down, driven by their 5-year plans. These are national priorities. They're focused on locking down material supplies, staying ahead technologically, and even setting the technical standards for SIBs globally. They tie subsidies to using domestic materials, insulating their industry from global price shocks, and companies like Hina Battery already building GW-scale SIB factories, thanks to the support.
All this action in the U.S. and China must be putting immense pressure on places like the European Union.
Oh, it's creating a major headache for the EU. Their policies lean towards sustainability, circular economy, laudable goals, but the sheer financial pull of the U.S. IRA subsidies is undeniable. We've seen big battery players like Northvolt, even Tesla, pausing or rethinking planned factories in Europe to chase the money in North America. It's forcing the EU to reconsider its own state aid rules, just to try and stay in the game and keep those critical investments from leaving.
It really feels like everyone sees sodium's abundance as a path to energy independence. We're seeing SIB projects pop up everywhere now, not just China.
It's truly gone global. You have India's largest conglomerate buying a UK-based SIB tech firm, Faradian, planning a gigafactory there. Think of the huge market for electric scooters and rickshaws in India. In the U.S., you have companies like Natron Energy pushing forward with mass production of their Prussian blue-type batteries, targeting grid storage. The drive to escape the lithium bottleneck is everywhere. Now, before we wrap up with the future outlook, it's worth remembering that sodium batteries aren't entirely new. There's a whole history of high-temperature sodium batteries that kind of paved the way.
Right, you hear about sodium-sulfur and something called Zebra.
Exactly. Sodium-sulfur, or NAS, pioneered way back in the 60s by Ford, actually. These operate hot, like over 250 degrees Celsius. They offer good energy density, long life, but they had serious safety and durability issues back then. High temperatures can cause problems like dendrite growth, thermal stress, things that can lead to failures.
So how did that affect them commercially?
Well, for vehicle use, it largely killed them off early on. Ford stopped its NAS EV program after a couple of battery fires in the 90s. Today, NAS batteries, like those from NGK in Japan, are mostly used for massive grid-scale stationary storage. Places where the heat management is less of an issue and their longevity is a big plus.
Okay, and the Zebra battery, sodium nickel chloride.
Zebra, developed in South Africa from the mid-80s, It uses molten salt, basically table salt. NaCl is the electrolyte. Runs a bit cooler than NOS, around 245 Celsius. And it actually was used in some early EVs,
Mm.
some fleet vehicles in Europe, police cars, postal vans.
If it used table salt and worked in vans, why aren't they common now?
The big drawback was the constant heating. If a Zebra battery cools down completely, it takes maybe 12 hours to heat back up before you can use it again. Totally impractical for a personal car you use sporadically. So now, Zebra tech, like from companies Energy, is also mainly for stationary storage or specialized fleets that run constantly.
So those older hot systems showed sodium could work, but these new room temperature nanion batteries are the real potential game changer for mass adoption. What's the near-term forecast? Where will we see these modern SIBs first?
It'll likely be gradual. Don't expect them in high-end performance EVs overnight. Full-scale adoption probably ramps up significantly after 2025. The initial targets are applications where cost, safety, and maybe power are more important than squeezing out every last mile of range.
So where specifically?
Number 1, stationary energy storage. Utility scale, home batteries. Volume isn't usually a huge constraint there, and the costability is super attractive. Number 2, electric 2- and 3-wheelers and low-speed EVs. Think scooters, rickshaws, city delivery vehicles, especially in huge markets like India, China, Southeast Asia. For those uses, affordability and safety often matter way more than having a 300-mile range. SIB's density is perfectly adequate, and the potential cost savings are huge.
Which brings us right back to that hybridization idea as maybe the most sophisticated play.
I think long-term, it's incredibly compelling. It stops being SIBs versus LIBs and becomes SIBs working with LIBs. You design a pack where the SIBs handle the high-stress power demands, protecting the LIBs, which are there purely for energy density and range. It leverages the strengths of both, while crucially insulating manufacturers somewhat from that crippling lithium price volatility. #outros Totre.
So wrapping this deep dive up, it's clear the energy storage world is getting more complex, moving beyond just one solution. Lithium-ion is still the king of pure performance, right? Unbeatable energy density when range or weight is everything.
Absolutely. But sodium-ion brings this powerful counterpunch, maybe a triple punch. 1, incredible material abundance, leading to cost stability, especially when other commodities go wild. 2, inherent safety advantages and better performance in the cold. And 3, that superior ability to handle high-powered charging and discharging without degrading as fast.
So the choice really comes down to the specific job the battery needs to do. Got range anxiety. Need the lightest pack possible. You probably still need lithium. But building grid storage, powering city scooters, balancing cost and safety, sodium starts to look incredibly compelling.
Which leads us to that final thought, maybe something for you to ponder. This race. Is it really just about chemistry anymore? Or is it shifting towards geography and policy? Will these huge government efforts, like the IRA in the U.S. or China's national plans, manage to reshape the supply chains, bring manufacturing home, and lower costs before lithium bottlenecks slow the whole energy transition down? Or could it be simpler? Could the sheer abundance and stability of sodium just make the whole lithium dependency kind of irrelevant for the majority of applications where maximum density isn't the absolute be-all and end-all? Maybe something to think about next time you check commodity prices.